So this week's episode of To Your Eternity, I have to say, Bon and his ability to see and interact with the dead seemingly kind of changed everything. It gets your mind racing because you think to yourself, at least I know I do, if Bon was to die and Fushi gained his form, would Fushi be able to see the companions that apparently are always following behind him? We see the giant bear from season 1, so many familiar faces that we thought we'd never see unless he transforms into them, so it kind of gets your mind racing there. But most importantly, the fact that Tonari, of all people, led him to Fushi, it really reinforces that we can trust Bon. Yeah, he kind of has a little evil smirk at the end because he's trying to regain his inheritance, but everything that I've seen of this man over 2 episodes leads me to believe that we can trust him, especially if Tonari, of all characters, wanted him to find him. And the thing I've been harping on for so long is Fushi needs allies, and he needs allies that can help him deal with the knockers. And what's better than a prince with an army? Well, of course, a prince with an army who can also see and interact with the dead. And I mean, I would think in that sense, you know, he would always be able to find Fushi if he always has an eagle above his head or, you know, a spirit behind him or something like that. But pretty crazy stuff overall. Now, full live reaction is available on the Patreon if you're interested in. Definitely this episode threw me for a loop, but I think the thing I want to bring up first is Todo, because what's interesting about this, and I didn't catch it initially when I was watching, I was just like, oh, this is kind of interesting. They're almost setting up like, oh, there's this boy servant who's clearly in love with our boy Bon, but upon rewatch, when I was grabbing the screenshots for this video, I noticed the fact that not only was the handkerchief that obviously Todo was flustered by and was kind of emitting that aura of love as he ran away, it's the exact one that the ghost girl ended up making him before seemingly disappearing. Now, what kind of feels like the likely bet for me right now is a reincarnation plotline potentially, like the ghost girl eventually passed on, was able to be born as a servant boy who now is working for Bon or something like that, because the physical similarities are striking. It literally, Todo just looks like 2 to 3 times the weight of what the girl servant was in terms of the little bit we did get of her. And the fact of the matter is, there's no other reason for Todo to be flustered by keeping the handkerchief unless he knew where the handkerchief was. And then in return, that gets Fushi asking questions like, hey, is it okay for 2 boys to love each other? Which in return, High State's descendant over here just ends up getting flustered, like, yes, please, if you want to be the girl for him, that's fine too, just, at this point, he's just so flustered, he's in for it. But I like what they're doing, because this whole concept gets my mind racing, because, there's so many things about this episode that kind of piqued my interest. The horse is one of them. I'm not sure the direction of that, but that horse gives me a vibe that the horse knows Fushi. But I don't see how, because from what I can remember, the only time I think there was a horse is like sometimes when they were traveling, like characters had him, but I mean, at that point, like, what's the real signature piece about that? I don't know. But the fact that the horse seemingly picked Fushi and Fushi was not going to pick it, I don't know. But it does lead me to believe that there's something more there that I'm interested in seeing, of course. But I think I really like the idea of what they're doing with Bon the most out of what I've seen with Season 2, because here's the thing with Bon, when you have spoiled rich kids who care more about luxuries and frivolous things than caring for the people of their land, and then when they don't get their inheritance, they end up spoiled brat and become evil. And in any other show, I think that's exactly what Bon would have been. But Bon very quickly realized what he did wrong, and I really like the concept of, you have this very, flamboyant family, this very high-energy family, and you have a king who doesn't strike me as, a vengeful king. Seems like he's a pretty peaceful king, all things considered. Even though when you look at their army, if you were to show that to most anime fans, their army looks evil, even though they're not. But, it's interesting because he immediately goes from, I spend my allowance on these extravagant birthday gifts or decking out the horse, where the brother spends it helping people in need. And the mixture of having, your future king talking to himself and quote-unquote seeing the dead or seeing people that no one else can. Mix that in with a personality that cares more about the extravagant things for his own life than the well-being of his people. It's no wonder he gets demoted and doesn't get inheritance. There's just a rightful king and a wrong king from a logical point of view. And the desire to basically, get Fushi and use Fushi as a way to redeem himself makes total sense. The thing that I think saves any skepticism about not trusting Bon, or at the very least, even if Bon gets Fushi involved in bad things and in returns put Fushi's life in danger, it doesn't come across as we can't trust him, just more so he has a lot of growing up and learning to do. But if there's ever been an ally that I think Fushi can utilize the most, it's him. He has an army. Even if he's not going to be king, he has an army to help with the knockers, and most importantly, he can see the dead. There's just so much potential with that ally, both when he gains his form eventually, but most importantly, utilizing him in the present, which in return, utilization correctly, even when he dies, his descendants, look at Heisei's descendants, they're still finding Fushi even generations down the line. If he makes a good connection with Vaughn, he could deal with the knockers for all eternity. Like, that literally seems likely. So I like what they're doing here and kind of setting in motion a long-term connection. And I mean, at this point, even if Fushi didn't want to be around Bond, it seems pretty guaranteed that Bond would be able to find him forever, because he literally has spirits that are basically, well, you know, trailing behind him. It's hard to not notice a giant bear following a boy, a girl, a tree stump, if that's what he turns into. It doesn't quite matter. But I'm interested because in this episode, Bond ends up bringing up a concept of what would happen if you reach your goal. And the goal is he has to become everything. And immediately when he said that, I kind of got skeptical, because it's impossible to basically gain every form, because humanity, we always create new things. So it would be impossible to actually live up to that goal unless there's some sneaky way to get around that, the way it was phrased. But he says, you know, the man in black, the Watcher here, he says you would be free. And that's an interesting concept, because up to this point, there's never been a moment where we've been given that carrot on the stick that says there's hope to be free. And for Fushi, I think it's really just he's saying that so Fushi will stop trying to give up, and because he probably looks at it as it's impossible to gain everything, there's always going to be something new to get, so therefore you'll be stuck in this cycle forever. But I think for Fushi, it's kind of what he needs, because he was ready to kill himself, even if killing himself would have reverted him back to nothing, as seen by the end of last week's episode. So there's a lot of really thought-provoking moments in this episode, and all of which just has me so eager for more. I mean, I said it last week, both the new characters we've been introduced to this season, I really enjoy. I think they both can be trusted in different ways, and I mean, even when you have Heisei's descendants, you know the knocker in the arm is going to come and hurt Fushi or attempt to hurt Fushi at some point, but I don't get the sense that he would do it willingly and in return would probably try to redeem himself should it happen. And when it comes to Bond, I mean, I don't know how much more I can say. I just like the character a lot, and I'm interested to see where he'll go. And I think the big thing that they're trying to reinforce with this season is generations. So we have Heisei's descendants. Every time there's a new one, they find Fushi, right? So if we can make Bond an ally that utilizes their army every generation, even when Bond ends up dead, we could, in theory, have a way to constantly deal with the knockers. We can deal with the knockers as it stands for, say, 20 to 50 years, depending on the life expectancy of this royal family. But what happens when they're dead, right? You know, you need to have that long-term plan, and it feels almost like To Your Eternity is trying to build up in a way that Fushi can gain these very high-power connections over time, and the generations and the almost promises. You know, you see it a lot with time-traveling stories, you know, you go 3 generations later, there's a time travel that helped my great-great-grandmother or something, and it's almost kind of what we're building up with To Your Eternity, where Fushi will have these connections that will outlast the initial person, but carry on to their descendants, and I think that's kind of what Heisei's descendants started up, and now I think we're building up with Bond, but that's just my interpretation anyway. But either way, I leave another episode incredibly impressed, very thought-provoking, a lot of interesting theories you can make from an episode like this, but of course, I'll pass the torch over to everyone. What did you think? Your own speculations, if you do have them, do let me know down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. Like I mentioned, you can also support the Patreon. We got a full live reaction to today's episode, and you can also get video shoutouts like a few are getting today. We got Crunchy, Fang 2, and The Monarch. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care. Have a good one.